right, everybody, welcome back to episode 1 here of our Fastbreak podcast here for the 2024-25 season. Many thanks to Ben Steiner for all that great conversation, and now we get to have a whole lot more. Very excited today to bring in Christine Brennan, a friend for a long, long time, and columnist at USA Today, and of course, you see her face many other spots too. It's great to have you on, Christine. We got some big news to share with people today, but also plenty of basketball stuff to talk to you about. So welcome to the Fast Break podcast.
Tom, it is great to be with you. And yes, you and I go back. Oh my gosh. We shouldn't say, but we will, right? We go back literally, well, we'll say to the 80s. So all the youngsters will go, okay, that sounds like the Civil War or something. But it is so good to be on with you, and our careers and the parallels and the intersection of our careers over these years, both Midwesterners and Big Teners, just fantastic to be on with you. So thanks so much for having me.
Totally my pleasure. And before we get into your book news, we just wrapped up with Ben Steiner, who's our senior writer on Fast Break. And one of our segments with him, we talked about the Olympics and how cool it all was with USA versus France and both the men and women. And you were there. So before we jump into all that, well, just tell me just about how fun that was and just how unique it was having the U.S. team win gold twice against the France team that was, playing in front of that crowd. It was just to be there in person just must have been an incredible atmosphere.
I tell you, the whole French Olympics, the Paris Olympics were extraordinary and beautiful. And what you saw on TV, it was that fabulous, like beach volleyball, there with the Eiffel Tower. Everything about it was just those landmarks, just gorgeous. And I actually was not at the men's final, but I was at the women's semis, and then was very involved with the women's final. But also, I will say this: we had a precursor, a good indication, Tom, of how that crowd would be for both the men's and the women's final, with the same matchup in both, as you said, at the swimming venue, which is where I was for that first week, because swimming's just a total blast, right? It's headlines, it's medals, it's races, it's anthems, it's all in 2.5 hours. And they do that for 9 days. It's just extraordinary news and just exciting and, fabulous as a journalist, fabulous as a spectator. And great stories, of course, the U.S. as well. But the great French star, Léon Marchand, who, by the way, is trained at Arizona State and now Texas, so trained in the U.S. But he went 4 for 4 in his individual events. And the noise level was extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary for the French. It was beautiful. And the way they're singing the Marseillaise and just going crazy as this kid poured it on and won 4 gold medals in those 4 individual races, and also a bronze in one of the relays. And Katie Ledecky even said, they couldn't wait for the 2028 LA Olympics, the Americans, because this notion of the French just loving this and being so boisterous, so fabulous and lovely. I mean, not to the detriment of other nations. They cheered, of course, but there was a French person in it, male or female. And then, of course, Marchand especially, they just went crazy. So we knew the moment the matchups got set up with the U.S. playing the French, both men's and women's, it's like, oh boy, Katie, bar the door. This is going to be something else. And it was. And I will say this, that I walked by and I saw friends who also walked by and this is so cool. It wasn't just the arena, right? It was the whole city that was just so caught up in both of those games, the men's first and then the women's. And of course, the U.S. winning both. But the streets, the cafes, the corners, all the TV sets that were on, you'd walk by a cafe. I happened to go by one with the men's game that I was not at, but also friends sending me pictures, big screen TVs, everyone gathered around having their coffee or their croissants or whatever, or lunch, whatever they were doing, Tom, and watching these games, cheering for the French, of course, at sidewalk cafes throughout Paris. How fabulous. And not just for the men, but for the women, and the way the women's sport has grown, which I know we'll talk about a little bit. But it was terrific, and the atmosphere extraordinary. And thank goodness the U.S. played the French, to finish it off, because, there was no let up, right? There was no, oh gosh, the French are out, the U.S. are just going to dominate. It really made it fun. And then, of course, that women's game so close to the end. That was a tight one. So again, probably the best that you could have asked for in terms of story. You and I, we cheer for the story, right? And you cheer for the best thing to write or talk about. And both those games just were the best because of the outcome, because of the fact that you had the French and as the rival in both cases, the crowd And then, of course, the U.S. Winning golds, of course, in both of them.
Absolutely. That's the one thing that made those 2.5 weeks so much fun too. It seemed like the Olympics were back. Obviously we had, COVID disrupted the Tokyo games and kind of had them a year later. It wasn't the same. And 16 just didn't have a lot of real huge vibes necessarily. There were obviously some individual stories here and there, but it seemed like very much so in 2024 in Paris, not only the games themselves, but just the city itself. It was a brilliant display of what the Olympic Games should be.
It was. I've been so fortunate to cover so many Olympics over the years, and 21 in a row, winter and summer. Who would have ever thought that I was hoping to go to one as a fan growing up in Toledo, the suburbs of Toledo. Just maybe someday I'll go to Olympics just to watch. And 21 in a row for work. But it certainly was the prettiest and just the most telegenic. And I truly think one of the best, and maybe the best I've ever covered. Sydney, Australia in 2000, I have to say, Tom, was pretty beautiful when they had the triathlon in Sydney Harbor going by the Opera House on that first Saturday morning in the 2000 Olympics. That was pretty cool too. But Paris, the venues, and, all the fans and all the people that, just have been a tourist and France and Paris, they just integrated every event so beautifully. And I thought that was terrific on their part, that they did not shy away from using the city. They used the city. London did some of the same things. And most cities do. But Paris has so much to work with, that visual feast. That was just terrific. And again, just an honor for me to cover those games.
I bet, and what's great about the Olympics, obviously, is that the stars of Olympic Games become legends forever. And we have certainly a lot of that. Like you said, that first week in the pool is great. The second week on the track is great. The gymnastics, everything, they all become legends. And so you're about to embark on a little project now with a legend of her own. Now I saw you mention over the weekend that you were in Indianapolis spending some time with Caitlin Clark, and you've got a new book project ready to go out. And obviously I reached out to you right away because that excited me greatly. We've been fortunate enough in Indiana, with Indiana's women's basketball team being really good the last 3 years, that we decided to cover them full time 3 years ago on our Sports Illustrated site. And obviously they've been along for the ride with Caitlin too. And it's been great to see all of that. And one of my all-time favorite moments was in February this year, sold out Assembly Hall, the iconic building. And not just sold out because of Caitlin. Indiana sold out 7 games this year, without her. But it was just an amazing moment. People lined up 3-4 hours ahead of time. Little girls in all their Caitlin Clark jerseys and all that stuff, and a unique environment too, because all those Indiana fans, they already knew that she was going to be coming to play for the Fever. It's like they wanted to hate Caitlin, but they really couldn't. And of course, but Indiana beat them like a drum that day. It was a great environment, and but she's just a special person. And so tell me a little bit about how the book and the project and what it's going to be like. And I'm sure you're excited to make this happen.
I am, Tom, and thank you, for mentioning all that. And, I will go back actually to IU women's basketball. My whole family, including you, my sister, who was a year behind you at IU. Well, so I went to Northwestern, and I was such a trailblazer that all 3 siblings went to IU. And so I always have had a very, big place in my heart for IU sports because they care, my siblings and my brother-in-law and a niece and others, I think, in the family too, that have Indiana or certainly Indiana connections, and I know so many IU grads. And always, that's Northwestern first and foremost, but IU. Anyway, a year, this well, a full year ago, so the 22-23 season, Indiana, weren't they ranked second in the country for a while there, women's basketball? Yeah. And they were playing really great. And so I started, I'm like a lot of people, Big Ten Network, among other places. And I started to really watch, keep an eye on it. Now, I knew about Caitlin Clark, of course, but I really didn't yet know about Caitlin Clark. I mean, I knew she was great, but I'm sure many people remember this, if you're an Indiana fan, that last game of the regular season of 23, prior to the Big Ten tournament. And Indiana's, I believe it was a 2-point lead. Certainly, they had the lead and just a couple seconds left. Iowa's got the ball, then inbounds. The defender kind of trips and Caitlin's free and outside the arc, of course, and just hits this prayer of a 3-pointer, goes in, place goes crazy. This is at Iowa. And you're just kind of, you cannot believe what you just saw. And I remember that was really the moment for me with Caitlin Clark. And I was watching it because my siblings were watching. We were texting about IU's great team that they had then, and obviously a good team the next year, and still good, of course. Great program there with Terry Morin. But it was this incredible shot by Caitlin Clark to win the game, the buzzer beater. Like, wow, okay. So keeping an eye on her now more. And then I think, like many people, I was not at any of these games. I was not writing or covering them per se. I was just watching her as a spectator. And I think that really helped me in what is yet to come. So again, watching the women's tournament now, I've covered it over the years. I've covered probably maybe 10 women's Final Fours, 10 men's Final Fours over the years. But I hadn't covered it in a while. I'm a columnist now with USA Today. I'm doing a lot of TV work, as you said. And so, I'm not, staffing it, not physically there, but I still care. And so I'm now watching the women's tournament a little bit more. Indiana, again, is of interest. Northwestern, I don't think we made it, but we'd been really good the couple of years before. Pandemic knocked us Northwestern out of a really great shot at going far in the 2020 tournament. And so, I'm watching it. And of course, now Iowa is moving on and playing well. And Indiana lost to Miami, right? I believe that was that tough loss, and maybe the round of 32, was that it, or 16?
Second round loss. The men lost to Miami one day, and the women lost to Miami the next day. So.
That was tough. And my household and with my family, that was a tough time. I felt everyone's pain. But Iowa keeps moving on. So now there's the Iowa, I believe it was the Louisville game with Haley Van Lith, and now I'm really watching. And by the way, me and probably several million other people, right? This is catching on. And I'm just so intrigued by this player, Caitlin Clark. I'm so intrigued by the threes. It's entertainment as much as it is basketball. These logo threes, the singular figure bringing the ball down the court, the passing, everything that we now know about Caitlin Clark. But I am seeing it developed as a spectator that I think was helpful for me as a journalist. I'm getting it. I'm understanding. I'm not in the press conferences. I'm not interviewing. I'm not the cynical journalist, going, yeah, well, but, or whatever, the way, some of us can be and are, and we're paid to kind of be cynics at times. I'm just watching. And I'm watching from my home here in DC and enjoying it. And then, of course, the South Carolina game. And she goes crazy and they upset South Carolina. Just has an incredible game. And now they're in the final. And then, of course, they lost to LSU, but the LSU thing and the Angel Reese and the whole shebang. And now I am doing a lot of TV. CNN has me come up to New York to talk about that game. And it becomes one of those things where it just takes on a life of its own. And as a columnist, also as a commentator, I'm now, and because I've covered Title IX and covered women's sports, or cared so much about women's sports and believed it should get more coverage, now here it is. It's getting that coverage. And I'll tell you a funny story. I'm at the Masters. So I went right down to the Masters, 2023 Masters, right after that, a couple of those CNN hits. And on the Thursday of the Masters, Tiger is teeing off. And this is Tiger a year and a half ago, where he was still could be a contender potentially. He's teeing off the exact time I'm doing an ABC News hit, ABC News streaming live hit in the clubhouse, in the press center, on Angel Reese, Caitlin, LSU, Caitlin Clark, Iowa. And the whole controversy that the game was Sunday, this is Thursday, we're still talking about it. And I did say this on the broadcast as I'm, giving my thoughts. Tiger Woods is teeing off, and I cannot believe I'm about to say this sentence. We are talking, 96 hours later or so, about Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, Iowa, LSU, women's basketball, the women's final game in the NCAA tournament, which had great TV ratings too, right? We're talking about that. I just can't believe I uttered that sentence, right? I'm like, when would I have ever said that? Of course, I caught up with Tiger out on the course, but the point is that it was like, this is really something. This is a very big deal. And while there were negatives to it, controversy, the issues, it also was, I saw it as a great positive that people care so much that they're arguing or discussing it. So anyway, move ahead. Of course, the seasons gets going. The last one, Caitlin Clark's senior year, I'm watching as never before. Again, there are so many people. So in that way, I'm kind of like every person, every woman, I'm just intrigued. I haven't met her. I haven't talked about her. I have not written about her. I haven't talked to her. I've talked obviously on TV, but in radio shows, but I'm not written a column because I haven't been there. I'm just kind of doing my thing. So my sister another IU sister in McLean, Virginia, buys a whole bunch of tickets for the whole family, about 10 of us, to go to the Iowa-Maryland game, which was early February. And we go, no press pass. I wanted to see it and see her in person as just a spectator. And within the first, you know what this is like, Tom, and your listeners and viewers know, within, the game starts, and I think we could check, obviously, 15, 17 seconds. She's bringing the ball across the court. She pulls up basically at the logo right over the half court line and nails a three. I've been covering sports for 40 some years, right? 42 years at that point, whatever. And my jaw drops and I actually laugh out loud. It's like unbelievable what I've just witnessed. At that point, I then wrote a column about her and should she stay or go, pro or not, and also about the Olympic team. I started to do some reporting on that. And I started to hear some kind of, I don't know about the Olympic team, which I could not believe I was hearing as veteran Olympic reporter, and also someone who believes strongly that Caitlin Clark should be on the team. One, because she deserved it, but two, because of the eyeballs she would have brought to a team that never gets the attention it deserves. The greatest, most dominant team in sports on earth, men's, women's, any sport, the women's basketball team for the U.S. And it just gets short shrift every time. And she would have obviously changed all that. So anyway, start writing about it a little bit. Finally, get a chance to ask her a question in person in June when the Fever was playing here against the Mystics in Washington. We finally shook hands and said hello in later in June when I was at the Olympic swimming trials, which happened to be in Indianapolis, and Lucas Oil. So cool. And I'd go over and do a couple Fever games because USA Today wanted me to do the Fever rather than cover the Olympic swimming, because just the interest in Caitlin and Caitlin Clark and the Fever is extraordinary. And then I finally met her and we had a quick chat. And anyway, one thing leads to another. I'm talking to my old book editor from Scribner. I hadn't written a book since 2006 for Scribner. My father-daughter memoir, Best Seat in the House. This is a long story, but I hope it's interesting to people. And I was just chatting and we're talking about one thing or another. And then pretty soon it was like, what about Caitlin Clark? I said, fascinating story, best story in sports, arguably the best known athlete, male or female in the country, most popular athlete, certainly the most popular female athlete in the country. And I could make the strong case, as I've written in a few columns, that maybe she is the most important female athlete in U.S. history, bigger than the 99 Women's World Cup team, maybe even bigger than when Billie Jean beat Bobby Riggs, which was huge in terms of the sustained interest, the TV ratings, the beating the men by 4 million, which you and I, Tom, would we ever have thought that the U.S. or that the women's NCAA final would beat the men's by 4 million? And that's Caitlin Clark in Iowa that, driving that, of course. And it did. And all of that. And at that point, so this is in July, right before I'm going to the Paris Olympics. So many months after I was interested in watching her play, like so many other Americans, and also many months after I wrote my first column about her, that I started a new list idea around. And then it happened quickly. Without a book proposal, which has never happened before to me in my 7 books. I think it's pretty rare. Without a book proposal, just in conversation with Scribner, they bought the Caitlin Clark book, and it is unauthorized in the sense, most books I think are certainly by journalists, that she is not, I'm not working with Caitlin on it in business. It's not a with book. It's not as told to. And I think that's better for obviously all concerned because it's the journalist's view, my view, although everyone I think can get a sense from my columns how I feel about lots of issues. I broke the Olympic news, I broke the charter news, and I'll be delving into all that in the book. But as I understand it, Caitlin will participate. I'm talking to the Fever and just getting going now on hopefully many, many interviews, and of course being around the team through the rest of the season and into the playoffs as well.
That'll be great. I'm excited for it. Having written 4 myself and edited and published 18 others, it's I love the topic of who she is, because she, like, to me, like you say, most important female athlete ever, maybe. I'm on board with that. I feel like what she brings to the table right now, and especially when you see all these little kids around and that, like, she's Michael Jordan to me. She's Tiger Woods to me, like, in regards to that kind of impact that she has on everybody that watches her. And I get thrilled all the time when I see these little girls, in their Caitlin Clark stuff. And I'm always just so impressed, because it's easy for us to be cynical, like you said, but I'm so impressed with how Caitlin handles literally everything around her. Like, she could get snippy when she needs to be, when people are taking shots at her, and she just chooses to take the high road just every time. So she's been enormously fun to watch. So I'm sure you're really looking forward to being able to have good chats with her and to tell all of those stories.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, I've said it. She's 22 going on what, 40, 50? I mean, the way she's handled everything is extraordinary, Tom. We just have to say that. How lucky are we as a culture that this is the person who's come along? Title IX, what Title IX has given us, the girl next door. I mean, everyone has a daughter, granddaughter, niece, or girl next door that they've watched, go jump in the car with her soccer uniform on, or softball, or lacrosse stick, or volleyball, and you've seen it and you've watched it develop. Well, here we are, America. Here she is. And it is spectacular that it is this person. All of the controversies, and I'll get into all of this. I'm a journalist. I'm going to ask questions of all kinds of people. I hope to have interviews with all kinds of players in this story. The Olympic snub. I'm going to go into that in depth. I do know a lot about it that I haven't been able to report just because a column, I wouldn't necessarily put it all in there. A book, I will. As I said, I broke that story on that night, June 7th, whatever. And I was surprised, stunned that USA Basketball did what it did. I still am surprised they did what they did. And of course, Caitlin totally deserved to be on the team, as it turns out. And Dawn Staley, don't take it from me, right? Take it from Dawn Staley, who said that. And her stats were already better than Diana Taurasi's when they made that decision, much less, of course, now she's playing like, she should be a candidate for the MVP award. We'll see how that goes and what those decisions are made. But the undercurrent against her, I wrote about that. Diana Taurasi, Brianna Stewart, I wrote about it. I wanted to get them to talk to me, gave them a week. This was an April column. Everyone can find, if they want to look at it, it's certainly will all be in the book as well. No paywall for USA Today. Just click through anything and close it out and you'll read it. And I really wanted to ask those questions of Taurasi and Brianna Stewart. Why are you, raining on this parade at the women's Final Four? Cheryl Swoops and her behavior, which continues. I'm hoping to talk to her and ask her why. So all this stuff, Tom, they got thrown on Caitlin Clark. All she's doing is playing basketball, fabulous role model, signing autographs, doing all this amazing stuff. Children, boys, girls wearing the 22 jersey, people coming from all over the country, in some cases all over the world, to watch her play now in Indiana. It's an extraordinary thing. And how she's handled all of this. The Kennedy Carter cheap shot. I'm going in, obviously we'll go in depth in all of that. I asked her about that the first time I met her in June, and she had a great answer that's online on my, on Instagram, Twitter, whatever. And I'll delve into that more, hopefully, with Caitlin when we get time to spend together. And I get a chance to talk to her about this season and how she's handled everything. But extraordinary. Her parents, upbringing, her coaches, her teachers, whatever it all is, that's all part of the story. How lucky everyone is that Caitlin has been so classy when others have not been, and she's just risen above it all in a remarkable way for a 22-year-old. Heck, you and I have covered professional athletes almost twice her age, right? Thrown things or hated things or been angry or mad. My goodness, covering Tiger Woods, I covered Tiger every step of the way. And Tiger, it very similar in terms of the reaction and, people not quite so sure and then loving it when they realize the rising tide lifts all boats. But Tiger Woods, he has no coattails, right? Because he wouldn't sign autographs. Caitlin is going to have so many more coattails for girls and women's sports and for boys sports, which she always makes sure to talk about. In 20, 30 years, I'm going to have literally like a million girls, flinging it from the logo. I'm sure coaches will be like tearing their hair out. But because she's going to have the impact that Tiger never had in terms of people of color getting into the game of golf. Many reasons for that. And I love golf and I played it my whole life. My dad wanted his daughters as well as his son to feel comfortable on a golf course back in the 60s and 70s, which was extraordinary. Great, my personal Title IX, my dad. But, Tiger just didn't want to go there with those issues. Caitlin goes there every single day and every night. Again, I'm going to get into all of this and of course, ask her about that need that she feels, frankly, that responsibility that she has undertaken at 22 years old to be that person for kids in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll be excited to read it. Christine, is there any sort of timeline as how quickly you want to try to get this done and get it on all of our bookshelves?
Well, thank you for asking, and that's a fun thought. Yes, when you have no book, not one word written, it's a fun thought to think of holding that book in your hand, right? As you know so well, Tom. It's going to be quick, and check with me in December and January when I'm pulling my hair out. Yeah, the idea is to have it done end of January, so that we can have this book. So it will encompass the 2024 year. I'll deal with Iowa, certainly, the TV ratings, some of the stuff we talked about, the Final Four, and starting to get that undercurrent of negativity that we finally, started to hear, and how she dealt with all of that, and why did those people want to say those things and do those things? That's what we're journalists. I'm going to ask, and I'll, obviously deal with everything about the Caitlin Clark story. And then now the season, and then the idea is to chronicle this incredible moment in American history. And it's not just sports history, it's American cultural history and our history. Title IX, 52 years old, here she is, and what it's meant. So I'll be working quickly. And as I said, in Indianapolis a lot, with the team a lot on the road, spending time with Caitlin and with her teammates and coaches and the general manager, Lynn Dunn, who I covered, when I was at the Miami Herald, and knowing her, for all these years. And so all these people and the trust that they're putting in me, I'm so honored. I truly am so honored. And you feel like a lifetime of work, has led to this moment where people know that they can trust you and hopefully know that I'll be fair and quote people accurately and tell the story accurately. This incredible story. So so hopefully, I'm not sure if they can have it out right at the start of the WNBA season in May, but June, July, absolutely. They'll be rushing it as quickly as they can. It's Scribner's the publisher. We don't have a title yet, but you can imagine Caitlin Clark's picture will be on the cover. And of course, the WNBA All-Star Game is in Indianapolis. So for sure, I would think we would do a lot of book signings and events around that in bookstores and other places in Indianapolis and in Indiana, and of course, Iowa. Basically, Tom, I'll just get a pickup truck, which I've never had a pickup truck, and we'll have it full of books, and I'll just be signing books on street corners in Iowa and Indiana. So I'm teasing, but I certainly.
Well, I can tell you though, Christine, that that's not really a joke, because that's exactly what Terry Hutchins and I did in 2017 when we wrote Missing Banners, our Indiana basketball book. And then same thing there too. Thankfully, there were two of us, but we wrote that book in 3.5 months, and then the joys of having my own book publishing company. We had someone edit it in about 2 weeks, and it was at the printer a day later. And by the time the season started, we were there, and we literally did that. I picked up 3,000 books at my printer in Grand Rapids, Michigan, dropped off half of them to Terry, and off we went. And we did, obviously Assembly Hall, the first game, we did all that, but we were at alumni groups and bars and everything in every street corner in Indiana. And we were lucky enough to sell all 3,000 of those books the first 2 weeks, and we were off and running, and it went happen fast. So if you need some guidance on selling books on the street corners in the state of Indiana, I'll be able to help you out with plenty of advice there.
You know what? I will come to you, and we'll make sure we hit all the radio shows, and of course your fantastic podcast. Maybe we can revisit it again when the book is out. And I hope to have news. I hope that it can be. It's a responsibility I take very seriously. Caitlin Clark is a very important person. Her story is hugely important, and I'm honored to be telling it for Scribner, one of the greatest publishers of all time. And the news analysis, what I've done with my columns, I think is a good kind of an indicator of where I'm going to go with a lot of this. And but also open to anyone. If anyone even listening to us right now, wants to talk to me, tell me a story, give me, whatever insight. I want to hear it. I'm kind of a sponge right now, as I know you've been with your books, and my website is just my name, ChristineBrennan.com, and you can email me there. So among other ways to find me. So, but yeah, it'll be quick, and but I'm very excited, and I think I can handle it, and I'm diving in head first, even as we speak.
I have absolutely no doubt that you can handle it. You've had a brilliant career, and people have thoroughly enjoyed a lot that you've done, not only as a writer, but also on TV. And certainly the last 5-10 years with the role of women's sports, and you sort of being that voice that we all need as journalists, of someone who takes it seriously and is willing to talk about it. You've been great with that. So I'm excited to read this book, and I'm sure it'll be great. And we'll keep in touch, and we will be on the same paths through most of the winter here. So I'm sure hopefully we'll run into each other in person here sometime soon too. So Christine, thank you very much for being part of the podcast today, and we'll look forward to following the progress with the book. And absolutely, you're welcome back anytime.
Well, Tom, you are a dear friend. We go way back, and we go back to that fabulous day in Chicago. Are we talking about that, or have we run out of time?
Yes,
but
no, we got time. I was just getting ready to bring that in. So, for everybody who's watching, now granted, this is a basketball podcast and all this stuff, but Christine and I have known each other since 1980. We've known each other a long, long time. And my favorite day in sports, I have, people have asked me, for 40 years, like, what's your favorite day ever as a sports writer? And I always tell them it was October 6th, 1984. I was working at the St. Petersburg Times at the time, but I grew up in Northwest Indiana as a huge Bears fan as a kid, and Walter Payton was my all-time favorite player. And on October 6th, 1984, Walter Payton was going to break the NFL rushing record. So I was lucky enough to talk them into letting me go up and cover that. So we were at Soldier Field for that, and Christine Brennan from the Washington Post was sitting in a row behind me, and we watched Walter do all that, and went down and did our reviews and wrote all of our stories. And while we were sitting in the press box at Soldier Field, we were watching Game 5 of the 1984 playoffs between your beloved Chicago Cubs and the San Diego Padres. And Cubs had a 2-0 lead in that series and lost Game 5. And it was the first time the Cubs, had been in the playoffs, since 1945. And I looked at you and you looked at me, and we said to each other, so there's got to be a great story up there at Wrigley Field. And we jumped in the car and we went up there and just ran into all sorts of amazing stories. And then, you called your editors at the Post, and I called my editors at Times, and so we've got a great story, make room. And they did. I found this 89-year-old woman crying up against the wall at Wrigley Field because her husband was in the hospital, and all he wanted to see was one Cubs World Series before he passed, and wasn't going to get it. And I saw another guy with a grocery cart full of Cubs Tigers 1984 World Series T-shirts that he was selling for $1. And I bought a bunch of them, and there was a bar in Clearwater, Florida, a restaurant, pizza place in Clearwater, Florida, called Capona's Dugout. And they had one of those Tigers Cubs World Series T-shirts hanging up in there for 20 years. And ran into all sorts of people. And I remember we just sat together side by side and wrote our stories. And back in the day when we had severe deadlines and we had to write quickly and get them done. But it was that was a great day and two great stories. And I loved every minute of it. And it's great that I've always been able to share that story with you.
Oh, I love it too. And I totally remember, because I couldn't believe, now the Cubs have, right, we put it in time now, the Cubs have won the World Series, right? The Cubs have had these moments. But back then, we couldn't even begin to overstate how devastating that was. Because, as you said, they had the 2-0 lead. Hey, they're going to make it. And of course, the Tigers were a great team back then in '84, and just steamrolling. But the idea of the Cubs and Tigers, right? I mean, the broad-shouldered, teams from playing forever. These two original, teams in Major League Baseball, and everything about it was just made for this storyline. And then it all came crashing down. Steve Garvey, right? Garvey was on that Padres team, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And they just blew it, as, unfortunately, they did. And back then, and yeah, I totally remember. And the Walter Payton story, unbelievable. So the Washington Post, I just left the Miami Herald, came to the Washington Post, covering the NFL beat before they put me on the local team, now the Commanders, but Joe Gibbs's teams back in the 80s they won games and won Super Bowls in Washington those days, way back when. And but they sent me, at this point I was covering the NFL, so this was the biggest story. So I fly to Chicago. You and I are hanging out in the press box. Walter Payton does this thing, amazing story there. And then we see this other, you're right, it was like a twofer. It was like the greatest doubleheader ever for journalists. And you and I shared that, and I'll never forget it as well, Tom. So thank you for bringing it up. And you are a dear friend, a treasured colleague, and what an honor to be on your podcast. Thank you so much.
I appreciate all that, Christine. I've always joked people with the Times that it was the best story to ever appear on page 9 of a sports section ever, because it wasn't ever going to make it on the front page on a football Sunday, but it was, at least it got in. In the joys of pre-internet days, at least they got it in the paper for me.
Well, and you were at the St. Pete Times. Wow, what a paper, right? I mean, you were at one of the great newspapers. I was so fortunate that then Herald to the Post. But that St. Pete Times was just not only the greatest writers, you guys were just terrific, but just the layout, right? The graphics, the color that they were able to use down there, just leading the way. So what a delight for you. And what an honor for you. And it says everything about your career that you were there. That was one of the top 10 newspapers in the country at the time, for sure. So both of us were lucky kids coming right out of the Midwest, Great Lakes, Big Ten, with these great jobs and these opportunities of a lifetime that I know you and I both feel I really feel this so important to say this. We appreciated every moment. We never took it for granted. And here we are. We're still vertical and still talking.
Still telling stories 44 years later. In fact, I was the very first story I wrote for a newspaper. I was a sophomore in high school. It was back in February of 1974, and when that date came up, 50 years anniversary of that story last February. The guy I wrote it about was high school wrestling coach at Lake Central High School. I went, and at a halftime of a basketball game, he wrestled a bear, for sort of halftime entertainment. And I wrote the story about it. And Bob is still around, and we shared all that and shared a laugh. But like 50 years of telling stories, and and you still at USA Today and all your little TV spots and big TV spots, and me now year 6 at Sports Illustrated and doing this vertical thing on digitally has been great. And I'm loving that this is the tail end of being able to tell stories again. After all those 20 plus years as an editor and manager of just sort of running things and not being able to be at games and not being able to write, to be able to flip that switch these last 6 years and, write, another 2 million words or so it's been a lot of fun. And so I'm looking forward to all that. So, and then doing these podcast things now has been a blast too. And we are really getting ready to relaunch that real big for this year. And recorded our first Hoosier Roundtable podcast from my Indiana site the other day, and that launches today. And we'll launch this one with the NBA. We've got Major League Baseball podcasts out and about now. We'll have a ton of team-specific stuff and Big Ten Roundtable podcast every week. We got a lot of stuff going on, so it's good. And it's just, I love this atmosphere, because there's never, like when we were, whenever you wanted to interview somebody for a newspaper story, if you got 3 or 4 minutes, you were good, and now you and I have just talked for 38 minutes, and it's great, and it's wonderful to have this portal and this way of being able to do things now to tell stories. It's a wonderful thing, and I love it. And thank you for being a part of it.
Oh, it is fun. And yeah, I'm sure people are saying, oh, this is 2 old people just telling stories. But of course, that's kind of what a podcast is, right? So it's fun. And again, thank you. And thanks for giving me a chance to talk about this Caitlin Clark book, because I really am honored. And I think I'm hoping to really, have a great time doing it. And she is, again, just, kind of what we've all been waiting for. And here she is. And Iowa, Indiana, just basketball country. People love sports, women's sports, it's just wonderful. So thanks again, Tom, for the opportunity. And I hope to see you. And my last request to all you Indiana people, because I know this is a big IU thing, and just be nice when Northwestern comes to town, little Northwestern. Okay. Just take it easy on us. All right.
I can tell you these last 3 or 4 or 5 years, and Northwestern has owned Indiana in basketball. So it is
the men's side, yeah, women's, right. And then football, football, who knows? So anyway, yeah.
Indiana, Northwestern football, both the same. So
a lot of that for sure.
Well, Christine, thanks again. I really appreciate it. And we'll look forward to watching the progress with the book. And certainly we'll talk about it a whole lot more when it hits the streets. And I'll look forward to my autographed copy. Okay.
Oh, absolutely. You'll definitely let's give away a few. And this is great, huh? Absolutely. I haven't written a word yet, but let's do something, and we'll do something for charity as well. Let's definitely do that and figure out a way to get some of these books into the hands of young, because I'm picturing writing it for a 12-year-old girl and their parents. You know what I mean? It's not a children's book, but this will be a book that I hope is it will be appropriate and for everyone. I hope everyone wants to read it. So a lot of those girls and boys out there as well. So thank you again,
Christine. Yep, we'll look forward to it, and we'll again thank you for being on, and we'll talk to you real soon.
I look forward to it, Tom. Thank you.
You're welcome.